So a lot of you have spoken to me or messaged me, or somewhere down the line we've had some sort of conversation where the topic of podcasts has come up. So officially, here is my podcast, and I've titled it the Work With What You've Got podcast. And yeah, so today is the launch of this podcast. And yeah, so today I am basically, the first episode is going to be about the title. The title is Work With What You Got. So that's the title of this episode, is Working With What You've Got. Because basically that's all I've been doing my whole life, is just whatever I've been given and whatever I've made with what I've been given. I've just been working with that. And I think at the end of the day, that's what everybody in life that's ever been successful, that's the measure, that was the step to the next thing, is working with what you've got until you build something and you've expanded, and then you work with what you got from that, and then you expand even more. So yes, so funny enough, today also, because today is Friday, so it being Friday and also the 18th of the 11th is also a very special day for myself, because it's one of my spiritual teachers, we say a disappearance day, but the day that he died, the day that he left this world. And I thought that in honor of him leaving the world on such a wonderful day, that I could also share a little bit about his life, because he is, in my opinion, he is a prime example of someone who worked with what they had and they created something magnificent. And now I'm not just talking materially magnificent. I'm actually talking about something that was materially really magnificent and such a material feat. Like I don't think anybody else in the world has done what he's done in specific areas and as a whole, actually. But at the same time, also, yeah, just a spiritually really good spiritual move, not just for himself, but also for everybody else that is benefiting from it, even in today's day and age, and from all the years that are to come. You know, people are going to benefit from what my spiritual teacher has done for many, many years. So he put in that dedication and he put in that sincerity to work with what he had. So without delay, a short little brief intro into what he did, basically, was that his name is Prabhupada, and he lived in India, right? And he had been married, he had a successful business and so on and so forth. And then eventually he took something called sannyas. So it just means like he renounced everything at a later stage in his life. So he went through his family life, he had his children, he ran his business successfully. And then at some point he decided he wants to slowly start renouncing all of that and dedicate his life to just spiritual activities. His kids were grown up, so they could look after his wife and they could maintain the house and so on and so forth. So he wasn't leaving anybody in a bad shape. So anyway, so he did that. He took what we call sannyas, or he took to the renounced order of life. And basically what he did was he came to America to spread spiritual life, to spread God consciousness. We say Krishna consciousness, so he came to spread Krishna consciousness here in the West. And on the way over here, I mean, he wasn't rich. I mean, he had no backing, no support. Even his spiritual circle basically like renounced him for some of the things that he did when he got over here. So he had no support, no nothing. And he came over on a ship called the Jaladuta, right? And on the way over here, he even had 2 heart attacks on his way here. And I mean, that's just crazy, because I mean, he still carried on. He didn't say, oh, I've had a heart attack, let me go back home. He had 2 heart attacks and he still carried on, and he still came to the West. He went to New York, specifically to America. And he went with basically nothing. He had like pennies he had pocket change in his pocket, and he had like a few books and I think some cereal or something that would last him like maybe a few days, or a week or whatever. And yeah, so the first year that he came over to America was apparently a very big struggle. And at some points he even considered leaving, because he was just like, you know, he thought to himself like, what am I doing over here? Nothing's working, nothing's happening. So yeah, but he carried on and he pushed on and he kept moving and he kept working with what he had. And basically what he started to do was he started to speak to people. And through speaking to people, he slowly started to cook for those people as well. And then he started to hold classes on spiritual philosophies. And then slowly through doing that, more people started coming because he had such a sincere desire to help people spiritually. He wasn't looking for the money. That wasn't what he was looking for. He was looking to really touch and affect and change people's hearts and get people to open up to the idea that there is something bigger than us. There is a God out there, and this God has a personality and a form and a name, and you can have a relationship with him, and all you have to do is basically add him into your life slowly but surely. You have to just bring God more into your life slowly but surely every single day. It's not just a once-off thing. Yes, today I have surrendered to God, or I've surrendered to the divine, and then, tomorrow I can do what I want. It doesn't work like that. It's an everyday thing, an everyday act, because at the end of the day, having a relationship with someone, it's not just a once-off thing. You don't just do something special and then that pulls you through the entire relationship. So it's just the same with God, is that it's an everyday act of surrender, an everyday act of service. And anyway, so that's what my spiritual teacher Prabhupada was. Well, that's my definition of what he was doing, but he was doing something along those lines. He was teaching spiritual philosophies. He was teaching the philosophy of what we call the Bhagavad Gita. So while he was busy teaching the philosophy and cooking for people and giving them classes, he was also translating the philosophy, because it was all in Sanskrit. And so he was translating it into English, and he was also writing his own books based on the philosophy to help get the philosophy out there, basically. And yeah, so eventually his classes started growing bigger and bigger, and he eventually started attracting people who had some money, and they started investing in the programs, and they started investing in him, and they got him even larger audiences, and so on and so forth. And as you can imagine, things just grew and grew and grew and grew, until eventually what we call the Krishna conscious movement, the God conscious movement, spread throughout the world. There were 108 temples built in something like 10 to 12 years all over the world. He had traveled the world innumerable times, and he was 69, by the way, when he came over here. When he left on that ship having 2 heart attacks, when he got here, he was 69 years old already. And he had done all of this in just a short matter of like 10 to 12 years. And not only did he do that, but he also started the first line of vegetarian restaurants in the world. And that's when vegetarian restaurants actually took off, after seeing what he did and how he did it. And yeah, so I mean, yeah, crazy things. And he basically started with nothing. He started with what he had, and it's not something that anybody could have taken away from him. He started with his knowledge. He started with writing, and he started speaking to people, and then he could cook. He learned how to cook from his parents when he was younger. So he cooked for people. And then he slowly started to build on that and build on that and build on that. And eventually he created a worldwide movement that is to this day still influencing and picking up the pace and actually just making its name in the world. So yeah, it's a crazy thing to think about, that most of us are wanting something with our lives, right? We're wanting to do something with our lives, but we're thinking, I know myself, I've thought many times, how am I going to do this? What am I going to do? How am I going to do it? How do I even start? And then, yeah, we look at someone like Prabhupada, who, like many other people in the world, started with nothing, but pretty much nothing, and then created something magnificent. And now I want to touch on the fact that he didn't just create something material. Yes, there's a lot of money that goes into this movement and the way things are, and there's a lot of money underneath it, and it does help, because money is necessary. It's the currency of the world, it's how things work, and you can use it to create and build empires, basically, But he didn't just do it for that. That's a difference, and that's something I want to touch on as well. Is that I see a lot of people out there who have the same mindset that Prabhupada has, and the same mindset that I have, in a sense of working with what you got. But the question is, like, what are we doing it for? Is it something that is going to help people both on a material level and a spiritual level? And now I don't just mean help people get food. I see a lot of people out there putting effort into helping people get food and so on and so forth. And that's great. I'm not saying that people shouldn't do that, because it's a basic necessity. Having food, water, clothing, schooling, education stuff, those should be basic necessities, and those things everybody should have. And at the same time, to provide people with something deeper than that, because all of those things are temporary at the end of the day. Like, I mean, no matter how much money you or I accumulate in this lifetime, what's going to happen when we die? Yes, we can pass that money on, like, no doubt. You could pass it on to your kids, you could pass it on to a charity, you could have built something that's now helping people, but we can't take that money with us. So no matter how much money we accumulate for ourselves, we can never take that money with us. It's like you can never also take your looks with you. So, well, I mean, I like to go to gym, right? That's also something I really thoroughly enjoy. I thoroughly love working out and getting in physical exercise. I do jiu-jitsu. That we'll talk about in these podcasts as well. Jiu-jitsu, working out. I love cooking. I love music. I love, looking good. It's something that helps me feel good. But at the end of the day as well, I also realize that these things are not going to assist me when I am dying, because then it's just me and my relationship with God at the end of the day. And yeah, so coming back to what Prabhupada was doing, is he built something. He built a house for all the world to live in. He built temples all over the world. We call them ashrams. So an ashram means a safe place. And yeah, this is a place where people can come to get spiritual enrichment, to become the best versions of themselves by learning the reality of life and what life is about, and why do we exist, and why are we here, and what is time, and what is nature, and is there a God, and who is God, and all of those things. So yeah, again, see, the material things that he created were actually for spiritual purposes. And that's the whole point of life, is to engage what we have that's material. We engage it in the spiritual side of life. We use it for a spiritual purpose. So the point of life is to be in this world because we are born here. I have a body, you have a body, we all have bodies. And we all have material things. We all have to get a job at some point. Well, not have to, but I mean, generally, we have to get a job. We have to go through schooling in some way or another. All of these different types of things. But then to use all the things we accumulate on a material level and put it towards something spiritual. So, yeah, and that comes back to working with what you got. Building something, having an aim. Like I wrote this little thing down on my laptop, and I am speaking from my own experience here, is that I spent so much time waiting for something to happen, or waiting before I had this or had that. Like before this podcast, I was thinking, I need to get a microphone, and I need to get one of those cool, like really tall stands, and I need to get some cool chairs and cool background, and like look how cool my background is. It's just white. But anyway, so I was thinking I need all these things before I start my podcast. But then I realized it's one of those moments where I think the thing that matters most is actually working with what you got, like with Prabhupada, like with myself, like with any person who's really, made it as a success. I mean, not that I've been successful. I've had small successes, but I'm still building. And anyway, so the point is to start with what you have, start with the things you have, and start sharing that, because when you share that, you create more. You allow more to come in. You're like pouring out your cup so you can get more juice or more nectar or more whatever you're putting in your cup. You can get more of it when you share it. And you also learn about what you are learning yourself when you start to teach it, when you start to share it with the world around you, because then you really have to assimilate it and make sure that you understand it so you can bring it across in a way that helps and affects people in a positive way. So yeah, so I was on this trip specifically, I mean, with a lot of things in my life, but with this podcast, and it just brought this idea of working with what I got back. And that's why I named the podcast Work With What You Got, because yeah, I was thinking I have to wait for these things and so on and so forth, and then I realized I don't. I just need to start with what I have. I thankfully got this really cool little what's it called, I think it's a lavalier mic or something like that, and you know, I have a audience to speak to, I have accounts which I created, and you just got to work with it. And I have knowledge, you know, and I can always build on my knowledge and research more and start sharing more. And yeah, and that's the important thing with working with what you've got, in my opinion, is to have a plan. It's important to have a plan. To have a plan and have an idea of where you are heading, but don't spend all your time planning that you don't actually end up making any moves, because so many people get stuck in the planning phase that they forget to make a move towards what they want. And oftentimes it's once you've taken that step, then things start to come together a little bit more, and then you step again and things to come together even a little bit more, and things get clearer, and you realize that what I'm doing is working, and this isn't working, and that isn't working, but this is working, so let me try more of this. And then boom and boom, and you build and you build. But that only really happens once you've taken that first step. And that means being brave enough to risk putting yourself out there, to risk the fact that this plan might actually fail, but to keep trying different things and keep experimenting, but with an idea in mind. So like, I want to be at a certain place, and then you experiment with a whole bunch of things, like using your talents. Like, what are you good at? I'm good at speaking to people. That's a natural talent. That's not something anybody can ever take away from me, unless I had to cut out my voice box or cut my tongue out. But I'm very good with those types of things. And even then, I can switch to writing because I have a natural affinity for writing. So these are things that I've learned about myself over the course of, if you didn't know, I was a monk for a while, but I also was on this very long, not very long, but I took time out to go on a journey to find myself. I dropped out of university, and I was in university because I wanted to get a good job, you know, I wanted to have money, and I realized that at the end of the day, that's not, it's a lot of things about the external world, but nothing about who I am as a person. And yeah, so I decided, you know, I need to go and do something different. I needed to find myself in some way. And yeah, through that process of taking risks and putting myself out there, granted, not all of them were healthy risks. I did put myself in a few situations where I didn't even know how things were going to work out. But again, I made it work with what I had. And I learned through the process that there are some unhealthy risks out there, and you should try not to take those. But if you do, you better learn from them and don't make the same mistakes again. But there are also healthy risks out there, and people should take them. And here's a reason why, is because life is meant to be lived for something higher than ourselves. And one of the ways that you build faith in the fact that you can do this and that there is something higher than yourself is when you take a risk, because you really put yourself in a space where you have to rely on something beyond yourself. Because a lot of the time when I've taken risks, the healthy ones, I had no idea how I was going to make it work. I just had this idea in my mind, and I had a plan, and I just had to surrender to the fact that if I put in the effort into this plan, then I am going to make it work. And that's what I've done. Every single time I've taken a risk, I just had an idea and a plan before I took the risk. And I had an idea of what I wanted out of it, but I had no definitive answer. I had no definitive place or destination I was heading to. I just had ideas, and I had a plan to work with these ideas. And that's what I've done every single time. And yeah, so having the plan is necessary, but not being caught up in the plan that you don't take the steps to get to where you want to be at the end of the day. And yeah, and through this process, I also realized, just like with my spiritual teacher, that because he started doing some stuff on this side of the world that the people back in his hometown, his spiritual family, that side, didn't agree with. So in India, they live by a very traditional set of values. And so in India, women were not allowed to enter into the ashrams because the husbands were supposed to have been trained spiritually, and they bring that spiritual teaching home and they teach their wives the spiritual teachings, right? So women weren't, it's not that they weren't allowed, but they didn't see the need of women going to live in an ashram. So they just said, no, it's only for men. But here in the West is a completely different world where a lot of us weren't brought up with a traditional set of values. We have, in my opinion, a lot of the West lacks a sense of culture. So we just grew up with a mixed mash of everything, and that's not always healthy. It does have room for freedom and creativity, but it's not always healthy in the sense of, we can see there's a lot of confusion in the world. But anyway, that's a topic for another podcast. Ideas, right? Anyway, so yeah, he did some things where he allowed women to stay in the ashrams that he created and stuff like that, and that took away a lot of the support, actually. And the point I'm getting to, the support from his family, from his spiritual family. And he had to do everything by himself, basically, even after he appealed for some help and so on and so forth. His family were just on, him and his spiritual family were just on two different, on the same pathways, but two separate ones, basically. And they didn't see the circumstances here. So, it was easy to just put up a judgment on Prabhupada. And yeah, so I think that coming back to myself is that what I've realized is that a lot of people are not going to understand what you're going through. Not what you're going through and what you're trying to create. So walking down this path where you're working with what you got and you're trying to build something, you do end up, or I found that I end up actually, I've lost a lot of friends. I definitely have. I've disconnected from people because I realized that our values just didn't mix. So that doesn't mean that I haven't made new friends, because I definitely have. But I've definitely evolved as a person where I realize that the people that I used to be friends with, I no longer connect to them in the same way that I used to. Because at that point, when we were friends, we had something to relate to each other with. But as I started growing, as I started evolving spiritually and started evolving my consciousness, not that I'm anywhere magnificent yet, but I at least started, I noticed that, I didn't really relate to these people the same way anymore. And I needed new people to relate to and new people to connect to who are on the same frequency. So I had a lot of people misunderstand me, and I still do. I mean, doing what I do, stepping outside of what people think is the norm in today's day and age, you do get a lot of people who are just not going to be happy with you. And I think that's something that I've definitely learned, and I'm still learning in a lot of ways, is to just, that saying, it is what it is. It is what it is, and I've just seen the capacity within myself to just keep building and keep going and keep connecting and keep stretching myself in new ways to connect with people and to see what else is out there. Because a lot of the time people are not going to understand what you're going through and what you're trying to do. And oftentimes if you tell those people what you're trying to do, it's like putting big ideas in a small space. It doesn't fit, it doesn't really make sense. And then, that's not really a saying, but if you share your good news with the wrong people, then it's not a good thing, because they send like a lot of, they can put negative intent into it. And whether you believe in that or not, I think it's valid and I think it's real. So I've definitely seen the necessity to still keep connections and still be in touch with people who were good friends of mine and so on and so forth, but also to understand that, these aren't the people I'm going to get inspiration from necessarily. I need people who are on the same wavelength and doing the same things as me, and those people I'm going to get inspiration from, and brotherhood and kinship and friendship from, because those people are doing what I'm doing. They're seeing the world in a similar way, and they're aiming for something, and that also helps keep you and I myself inspired, because it's inspiring to be around people who are doing more than you, because it helps you to see what do I need to do more of, and also helps you to realize who you are as a person, who I am as a person, because I have limits, and I can set my standards for myself, because I don't have to be like everybody else, and I can do things at my own pace. And I also do need to learn to keep the ball rolling, because if you stop too much, then you may not actually make the progress you want to make with what you're doing. And I'll share like another thought process that I've had through working with what I've got, is I would often also tend to look at other people and see what they're doing, and I would feel like I'm nowhere. I mean, I still feel like I'm nowhere in a lot of ways, but I would feel like I'm nowhere, and I would see all the things they have. Wow, look at their setup. Look at their podcast setup, for instance. Look at all the support they have. Look at all the funding that they have. And then I realize that a lot of those people never started with like that. Yes, you do get some people who are rich, or they have some sort of backing and they put all that money into what they're doing. But a lot of people, like myself and like my spiritual teacher, we started with nothing. And we built on that, and we just keep building and keep expanding, and then build on that and keep building, and then keep on expanding as you go and as you grow. And I also think that something that I've also definitely noticed is that a lot of the time people will have a lot to say about what you're doing. I mean, I've had a lot of people tell me certain things, and I've learned how to discern whether or not this person is someone I should listen to, or someone I should just be like, thank you, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing there. Because people will say anything and everything, but you have to discern between someone who's in the battlefield with you, busy making moves and making things happen, and someone who's just sitting on the sideline with a burger and a Coke in their hand, shouting, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this, you should do that. Because that person, you may get some tips from that kind of person, because I mean, they, you could, I guess, just take the gold from the dirt there, but at the end of the day, they're on the sideline with a Coke and a burger in their hand, when you and I, if you're doing something similar to I am, which I would imagine you would be if you were listening to this, but we're in the battlefield with a sword in our hand. So it's two completely different scenarios. And learning to take advice from people who are in the battlefield, and who you connect to, and who you can relate to and find some sort of connection with, because I just wouldn't listen to everybody, basically. People will say anything to, throw you off, or these types of things. So anyway, yes. But at the end of the day, a lot of the work, so why I was saying that is because a lot of the work that we do behind the closed doors is going to go unnoticed by other people. So it's good to have someone who can see what you're doing. You don't have to tell them everything, but you can see what you're doing, and who can give you good tips on how to proceed forward. Because someone who doesn't see what you're doing, and they have no idea what it's like to be in the battlefield, or on the field, on the playing field, they can just shout anything, I mean, at the end of the day. And what experience do they have anyway? So so the hard work that goes in behind the scenes is definitely something that opens the doors for more opportunities to come, because sacrifices are necessary in life. I mean, we sacrifice one thing to gain something better, right? You have to give something up in order to get something better. That's the whole point of addiction, is that people are caught to something, and in order to get out of it, they need to give it up and attune to something better, attune to something higher, and that gives them a better quality of life. So it's the same thing in everyday life. If we want something different, we have to give up the things that are holding us back, and you have to really start to look at improving yourself in order to create something better for yourself, and also better for the people around you. And that comes through the work we put in behind the scenes, and the sacrifices that we make behind the scenes. It's like studying to be a doctor. everybody else is out there partying, woo, and they're living up their life. But at the end of the day, when you've done your PhD and you're a doctor and you're earning the money you want to be earning and you're changing people's lives by helping them, the other people who are out there doing, who just partied their life away when they were younger, they are not in the same place that you are. So having that vision and having that understanding that, what I'm doing is going to pay off, and just remembering that bigger picture and realizing what I'm going to do is paying off, and what I'm doing is going to produce some results eventually, and having that confidence in yourself and what you're doing is definitely something that I've seen in myself, and I still remind myself, but it definitely helps at the end of the day, because people are always going to have something to say. And again, they're the ones with Coke and burger in their hands, and you're the one and I'm the one who have swords in our hands, who are in the playing field, on the battlefield, and are making moves happen and making things happen. So I think that is what I want to say with Work With What You Got for this first episode of my podcast. I hope that this inspired you in some way. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube. And you can follow me on all my other social media as well. I do a lot of things on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, so you can catch me on all of those. I'll post links to that in the description below. And if you want to read a bit about Prabhupada, I will post a link to his biography that you can read and see what he did and how he did it. And remember that life is not just about the material things. There's something bigger than us out there, and something that we can connect to help us discover ourselves and help us improve the quality of our lives, and help us dig really deep so that we can give something to people that really helps them to really make significant change in their life, because we're all in some ways lacking a connection with something bigger than ourselves. So in order for us to give that to someone and to really make a difference in the world, we have to get that ourselves. We have to develop and grow our apples so that we can give people apples. Because if you don't have apples, how are you going to give people apples? And at the end of the day, again, the spiritual things in life are what really matter, because that's eternal. The material things are temporary. So it's good to have them because they can get us places and they can give us opportunities to do things and open doors for certain things. But at the end of the day, our relationship with the divine, our relationship with God is the most important, because at the end of the day, that is the only eternal thing we really have. So yes, thank you for tuning into my podcast, my first episode. Please let me know what you think. And yes, I look forward to the next episode. I am obviously going to be inviting people on here that I think would benefit all of y'all and myself in discussions about relationship dynamics and everything that I spoke about in today's episode, jiu-jitsu, all of these types of things. We're bringing it all together and linking it with the divine in some way or another, and weaving conversations around all of those topics. So yes, stay tuned, and thank you for tuning in.